All right, so we're here on a chilly January morning, and we're outside 789 Stratton Street. We're going to come to why we're outside those in a minute. But first, I want to introduce Oliver Bullough. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, your book, and just introduce yourself to my listeners?
Yeah, I'm Oliver Bullough. I'm a journalist. I'm a Russianist, I suppose, and because being a Russianist, I sort of advanced backwards into being a corruptionist because it's a pretty natural progression, to be honest. And that inevitably, therefore, takes you to London because this is where the money likes to come. We're in Stratton Street's in Mayfair, so one of London's most prestigious areas. It is the most expensive square on a British edition of Monopoly, Mayfair, and it remains pretty posh. Just a block away, actually, is Novikov, the Russian elite's favourite restaurant in London. Just around the corner was where Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned. This is kind of ground zero of British kleptocracy. It's also the big hedge fund district, so this is where the money comes.
If I asked you to name some corruption hotspots around the world, odds are pretty good that I could guess which ones you'd come up with. Russia, Nigeria, China. Venezuela, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. But one place that you might not think of is London. London is a place known for its iconic double-decker buses. But Oliver was involved with the London bus project of a different kind. A tour not of Big Ben and Westminster Abbey, but rather of the extravagant real estate holdings of some of the world's most corrupt individuals.
So tell me a little bit about the kleptocracy bus tours. What would have happened if we were on the kleptocracy bus tour? Where would we go? What would we be told? What sights would we see?
The idea is it's like a Hollywood bus tour, but instead of showing them, I don't know, where Kiefer Sutherland gets his teeth whitened, you go and show them where the Russian deputy prime minister's got his apartment, or the ruling family of Egypt, the Gaddafi family, Nigerian regional governors, Bahrainis, you name it. I mean, this is Britain, it's a target-rich environment. Basically, the idea was to make it clear in concrete real estate the extent to which Britain has been accepting questionable money from around the world, and therefore has been perpetuating the rape and pillage of some of the most vulnerable people in the world.
I'm Brian Kloss, and you're listening to Power Corrupts, the podcast where we shine a light onto the hidden and often nefarious forces that shape our world. Today, we're going to focus on corruption that happens in plain sight, dirty money that flows freely in places that pretend to be clean. And we're going to find corrupt people where you'd least expect it.
So tell us a little bit about where we're standing and what you'd sort of tell us on the kleptocracy tour if we went by a property like this.
So, I mean, Mayfair has always been, for 200 years, the sort of heart of prestigious London. This is where Regency dandies used to patrol 200 years ago. It's where the British establishment used to come 100 years ago. This is where people like to be. The buildings are high quality. There are excellent restaurants. The Ritz is just over there. Fortnum & Mason's, the poshest shop in London, is just nearby. There's an amazing park just at the end of the street. It is a lovely part of town. And then about taking off with the Arab oil boom, but then really accelerating with the breakup of the Soviet Union, it became the place where the new rich, the kleptocrats of the world, like to store their money. And so the houses here ceased to be desirable residences for a particular stratum of British society and instead became essentially a global asset class. If you park your wealth here, it is protected by one of the finest legal systems on earth, and it's nice. It ticks two boxes. Your money is safe. It's going to keep appreciating because people keep buying here, so the prices keep going up essentially. And when you come to London, when your wife comes to London, when your kids come here, when your mistress comes here, it's a nice place to come and stay. So it's a win-win-win for the kleptocrats, and Britain has been very happy to accommodate that for decades.
In the past, Mayfair was home to a who's who of London elites. Queen Elizabeth was born there. Winston Churchill lived there. And in a quirky twist of history and musical trivia, the classical composer George Frederick Handel lived in a Mayfair flat that Jimi Hendrix would occupy a few centuries later, now a museum called Handel House. But today, you don't have to just be rich to buy a big house in Mayfair. You have to be super rich.
What are some of the prices that you'd be looking at for these places that are on the bus tour and Stratton Street? I mean, how much money are we talking about to get a house in Stratton Street or in Mayfair?
Oh, name your price. I mean, these houses don't come up. In the tens of millions of pounds. They're the kind of prices that, cease to be meaningful.
On that frigid January morning, Oliver and I were standing outside of 789 Stratton Street in London. It's a massive big red brick building, 5 stories plus a basement. Ornate white trimmings all around the windows. A palace fit for an oligarch playboy or a corrupt crook. But it has a sort of deserted air about it. A discarded newspaper sat in the entryway. A buzzer that looked like it hadn't been used for some time, dust collecting on top of the metal box. And that was for a very good reason. The owner of that Mayfair mansion is a fugitive.
Tell us a little bit about Joe Low and who he was and why he might have wanted to buy property here.
Joe Low is the subject of the biggest ever kleptocracy case brought by the DOJ in Washington. He is a world-class kleptocrat, though he says the case against him is politically motivated and he says he's not guilty. He hasn't had the opportunity to say that in court yet because he's a fugitive. He's on the run, widely assumed to be in China, but that's not clear. He, according to the DOJ case against him and other cases in Malaysia and Singapore, he masterminded the epic theft from a Malaysian sovereign wealth fund, 1MDB, of I think 4.5 billion US dollars with a B. It doesn't really matter when you get into billions, however much it is, a lot of money. And he spent that money, according to the DOJ's case, enthusiastically all over the world. He had some what sounded like really amazing parties in Las Vegas, yachts, apartments, luxury goods. He produced a Hollywood film, The Wolf of Wall Street, and many other things. And like any self-respecting kleptocrat, he owned property in London because they all do. So he had, I think, according to the DOJ documentation, which is how I know this, it's not, British authorities haven't done anything. According to the DOJ, he had 5 different properties in London. One of them was a parking space. The other 4 were real estate. And these are 2 of them here.
Low is a baby-faced 38-year-old. He was educated at the elite Harrow School in London. And Oliver wasn't kidding about the birthday party either. He hired runway models from the US to pour Cristal to A-list celebrities, ranging from Usher to Ludacris to Leonardo DiCaprio. Kanye West and Jamie Foxx joined forces to perform Gold Digger. Britney Spears burst out of a cake. Kim Kardashian, Bradley Cooper, and Benicio del Toro were also there. There was a Ferris wheel and a carousel to ride. And at one party in Vegas, guests threw $5,000 poker chips around the room and then watched as 20 Playboy models got down on their knees to collect them. And then Psy capped off the evening by performing Gangnam Style. Low bought his Stratton Street mansion in London not far from his $55 million office where he ran his high-end lingerie business. But I wanted to understand how Oliver figured all this out, how he figured out that Low lived in London, where he lived, and how he knew that he had acquired these high-end properties in the first place.
If you were trying to buy some super fancy real estate in London and you wanted nobody to know about it, how would you go about that? How would you determine the best way to set it up? What shell companies would you arrange?
Well, I mean, it's supposed to be impossible, right? We're supposed to be a very well-regulated jurisdiction, and yet mysteriously these bad apples keep slipping through into the barrel in their hundreds and thousands. So, I mean, there are clearly some major gaps in Britain's defences against money laundering. Essentially, you need a lawyer. You need a good lawyer. Fortunately, we have plenty of those. They will keep your name off the documentation, and the easy way to do that is to own property via corporate structure, a shell company. The British Virgin Islands is a favourite destination. It's not the only one. Marshall Islands is good. Jersey's Trust is good. Nevis, if you're particularly dirty. There are a lot of options out there. Basically, there are a lot of jurisdictions that will essentially sell you anonymity. And once you've got anonymity, you've got plausible deniability, and you can own property in the UK and elsewhere, but the UK is a good place to do it via a corporate structure, which means that your name doesn't appear on the documentation, which means that no one knows that 789 Stratton Street belong to Joe Lowe, and instead they think it belongs to 7 Stratton Street Limited of Tortola, British Virgin Islands. And it is very, very difficult to find out who owns the British Virgin Islands company. If you have a court proceeding, that's how you can do it. But
At that moment, we got interrupted by the sound of a garbage truck rumbling by.
I